Origin reaction. This is why the UK's economy stopped working. What? I didn't know that. This was on Bloomberg originals. Yeah, there you go. I don't know. 4 million subscriber. Yeah. So I'm guessing there's some kind of a catastrophe coming or something. What is happening? Like this title is like, what, or is this one of those titles that they just put it to amplify things? But it's not really that, because I've been watching a lot of videos about economies and things for years now, right? Like Brexit thing. There was always believed the Brexit thing is going to be felt for a long time. Okay, then it kind of stopped because of like COVID or something. Because everybody's economy stops, so of course it's going to freeze. But as soon as like COVID stopped and like economy like business as usual, UK's issue was felt even more and more. So is this because of Brexit, or is Brexit just one of the things? Like there are many layers to it. It's going to be a really interesting video, I guess. Prime Minister's constantly changing. Government's constantly changing. That's not going to help with the policies and things. And you need that to drive your economy and see where the problem is, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Let's do it.
Britain's economy is under incredible strain, more than you may realise.
Austerity through to successive, extraordinarily expensive and damaging crises has left the UK with an enormous debt burden.
Compared to our friends here, or in fact in any major advanced economy, national debt in the UK has ballooned the most since COVID. But it's not just borrowing that's an issue. Look at tax revenue as a percentage of GDP, basically the share of the country's output that the government takes to pay for what the public needs. It's almost as high as when what the public mostly needed were bomb shelters. And in an election year, that's a massive problem for whoever's tasked with writing a new spending plan.
Can't raise taxes, can't really let debt go much higher, and yet public services are crying out for more money.
Britain's appointed as many prime ministers
wait a minute. Can't raise the taxes, okay? Now, like, you need like NHS and things like that, like asking for more money. Those two combinations can't, or like money's not just gonna come from something. I mean, I guess like if you slash things where you don't need it, but I mean, you probably need it, like where you gonna slash money from? So yeah, this is the reason why like prime ministers are constantly changing. What if with the election is like, he just like, said like, I'm pretty sure he like jumped the gun or something. Like, okay, I'm announcing election this year or something. Like that's what it happens in UK. Prime Minister announced when the election gonna be or something. I don't know much about that. But he jumped the gun. His party was pissed. I think that was the case, right? So whoever gets like elected, what if that person like suddenly, same thing happens that happened in the past, where they just like keep like resigning and new guy comes on, right? I'm guessing, Rishi Sunak, this guy has been there for like good enough time now compared to his predecessors, who are constantly like giving up, I guess.
5 years as Taylor Swift's released re-recorded studio albums, 4 to be precise. So the question is, can a new UK government fix a problem its predecessors couldn't?
The next government is inheriting an incredibly difficult legacy. The burden of taxes on the economy at a 70-year high. Public services are creaking at the seams. Record waiting lists in the National Health Service. Parts of the justice system have had nearly a halving of the number of courts that are operating.
You get the picture, and it's not a pretty one.
What, half?
Some of this is down to government spending during the pandemic, which was bigger than any G7 economy as a share of GDP, bar the US.
We are providing 200...
UK just went the US way. Oh, we're going to spend just the way US is doing. Yeah, but US, that economy was like ridiculously high, right? I mean, come on.
And £80 billion to get our country through coronavirus.
But here's the thing. Most of that money was borrowed from creditors when interest rates were down around here, at historic lows, and repayments were expected to be relatively manageable. And they might have been, but then...
The Russian assault has begun.
The largest invasion of a neighboring country in Europe since World War II.
The invasion triggered an energy crisis as Europe's access to vital Russian oil and gas was choked by sanctions and trade restrictions.
UK households will pay almost triple the price to keep their homes this winter compared with a year ago.
We're in the middle of a national emergency. People are really scared and families don't know if they can warm their homes this winter.
The cost of living began to soar, and the UK was once again the second most generous with financial support, behind only Italy.
Overall, £400 billion or so in additional spending, all of which went into debt.
Oh, come on, man. Look, I watched Top Gear. I didn't just watch Top Gear. I watch every single episode of that. I'm pretty sure if I watch a clip, I would know like which season or even roughly which episode it might be. The one thing I get, British curse, right? Like overgiving it sometime, that type of way, right? Like, people don't want to haggle too much, this type of way. So I don't know, I kind of can see that, right? Like whenever crisis come, they like become really loose with their money. Like, okay, let's just give them, right? Okay, there you go. I'm gonna spend this much money for COVID. Now the war started, like gas price, and obviously because of sanction was cut down, they will lose that as well without really worrying. Like, what about the next time? Like, we are borrowing money. Is going to be a problem. They didn't thought of that or something. That's insane.
And all of which gave us the biggest increase in debt as a share of our economy of any G7 economy.
The twin impacts of the pandemic and the energy crisis pushed our inflation rate to new highs and forced central banks to ramp up the interest rate in an effort to halt it. And if you're lucky enough to own your own home, you may remember that time your mortgage payments went up by hundreds of pounds a month, seemingly overnight.
What?
Well, this is why. But for the UK government, it wasn't repayments for a lovely house, but for hundreds of billions of pounds of national debt.
The combination of those two events has increased how much it costs to pay for our debt from about £40 billion a year to about £100 billion a year. That £60 billion increase in spending just on debt interest is equivalent to the entire defence budget.
As a result, there are tens of billions fewer pounds left to spend on anything else, from health to...
Whoa, that's a big number, right? I mean, you get warped reality when you see like economies of like USA and China, see the numbers thrown around like even to a trillion. But we need to put in perspective, right? Like he said, that's the equal amount to like how much they spend in defense budget, right? Like that's a big thing. People put like significant enough, not too significant, but significant enough, like something that can be felt type of amount into defense in UK and Europe, basically like that, right? I'm not saying like they spend same way the US and like China does, which is like much higher, right? Because Europe, NATO countries, European Union. I'm pretty sure I saw the video like how much are people like per capita, how much they're spending in defense. Germany, everything was ridiculously low. I'm not saying UK spending equivalent to how much they're making that much, but still like it's significant. If your debt just like raises like 60 billion, which is equivalent to that defense, yeah, that's gonna be felt.
To police, to defence. But the extra borrowing on those crises didn't come with faster growth. In fact, the UK economy has barely expanded past pre-pandemic levels. You can see here, only Germany's grown less than the UK in that time, as it was so dependent on cheap Russian gas that it faced an existential crisis when the taps were turned off. Germany's also spending a far lower proportion of its GDP on servicing its debt though. So the challenge to the new government is, how do you pay off a huge pile of debt without raising taxes, or borrowing, or squeezing public services even harder? Well, one of the best ways to grow an economy is to make a nation more productive.
What happens with improving productivity is that for the same amount of work, you get more out of it. It doesn't mean what many people think it means, which is just that you have to work.
I mean, you can micromanage that, sure, but I don't think it's going to be that fast.
Harder. If you are working in an old-fashioned newspaper and you move to a tech company, the tech company is more profitable, has greater margins, and you could work less hard, but your contribution in terms of productivity to the economy could be greater because effectively you're working smarter.
In the wake of Brexit and COVID, the UK is in a unique position here.
We did inherit a situation where output per head productivity in the economy had already been weakening quite dramatically after the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009.
Which you can see here, altering a trend that had been in motion since the 1970s.
You then had the impact of Brexit, which had a particularly sharp effect on investment, which we saw feed almost immediately into growth and again pulling down our overall efficiency, our output per head. And then COVID has added this extra legacy.
Which means we need our heads to be working even smarter. But for the time being, we need bodies too in the workforce. And here we have another problem. Across the major advanced economies, every country saw an increase in the proportion of people finding jobs and going into the workforce, or trying to, after the pandemic. But look at the UK. We lost workers. More people fell into long-term sickness, and people just dropped out.
There's 1 million people, in a sense, missing from the labour force, many of them claiming disability benefit or sitting on an...
Oh my God. Look, man, UK or Britain, it's like Britain makes a lot of things, right? But one thing I've noticed in past multiple decades, like most of the things Britain make, like ownership of it, or at least something else has gone to foreign market, right? Britain doesn't really own anything. I mean, even though there are factories there that make things, someone else owns it, some other country guy owns it. Like Britain is like one of the countries who can make things, right? It was like, Industrial Revolution, that they're one of the first of it, right? So Britain can make things like Britain, architectures and things like that. It's like, world famous, right? So Britain is in a kind of way like Germany, right? Like Germany is like engineering hub type of way. So Britain can do that as well. But one thing I realized, like Britain just let goes of things a lot, right? Even look at it with the COVID thing, like people just like, fuck it, I'm not just, just lost the jobs rather than like increase, right? All around the world, people are like, oh, finally COVID is over. Like people just went to work. That didn't happen in UK, which is like fucked up. So everything's piling up right now, right? All this thing, or the Russia thing, the COVID issue, right? And now even this, everything's piling up.
NHS waiting lists.
One of the drivers of growth over the last decade or two, prior to the pandemic, had been the increase in the participation rate.
So the proportion of people able to work actually doing so.
By going into reverse, that has caused a very particular British problem.
Participation has not come back since the lockdowns. That represents a lot of missing productive capacity.
This is all monumental pressure for the next government to withstand and relieve. They need to get the population able to work doing so, and in a more productive capacity. Then there's wiggle room to deal with high interest rates and bring down national debt, freeing up tax revenue to bolster public services and support the people unable to work in the first place.
Everyone agrees this is an enormous challenge, but if it's one a new government can pull off, the potential gains are massive.
I don't know, man. Like, feels like too much of a challenge. Like, have we seen any cases of any competent government that can do it at this level? I guess slowly, step by step, maybe can be corrected. I don't know. To me, it feels like too many elements are becoming a problem, right? And definitely Brexit is in the middle of it. It's not really helping, right? I don't know, man. I mean, because of Brexit, right? Like nobody, just European Union workers cannot just work in Britain. Like if you didn't have Brexit type of way, you could have workers from there, right? Migrate into UK and workforce could go up, but that didn't help. Obviously, the people who are working don't want to work like that, right? It's clear decline there. I don't know, man. Like I said, UK is one of those people who can actually make things, right? Innovation and things like that. That UK is known for that. Right, so just with the right incentive, right plan, it can be done, but I don't know, man. Well, that was why the UK's economy stopped working much on Bloomberg Originals. If you like my next, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.